Josef Koudelka performed magic with his black and white film negatives. Right, he metered by eye, by memory. Right, and he had formative experiences shooting in the theater where he was able to very closely shoot the drama and in theater lighting and be experimental with pushing film really, really hard. Right, and then that turned into using some of those techniques with the Gypsies and with the invasion of Prague. Right, and he figured out how to take 400 speed film and, in his mind, it was like getting the most out of it or pushing it the hardest. Right, and there's not a lot of detail. We read that sometimes it was a hot developer, and sometimes he would just leave it in there for a really long time, sometimes overnight. Right, but it just shows you the spirit of pushing it as hard as he could. Right, and his photographs have a look of being pushed, but of a lot of density. Right, there's reports that some of his negatives were so dense that they required the best printer in the world, and he needed a 4,000 watt or 5,000 watt enlarger, and there are none of those left in the world. Right, and there's Koudelka grieving that some of his negatives will never be printed in a darkroom again because you don't have the combination of the master printer and an enlarger with enough power to be able to print his dense negatives. So, but I also know that he shot a lot, right? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of rolls of film a year, right? It's like, he'd carry around 1,000-foot roll of film and bulk load 100 to 200 rolls at a time, and just, he shot a ton. And so I don't think he was developing all of his film that way. I mean, I can't imagine he was, letting all his film sit overnight. Now, I tried letting a roll sit overnight, and I got just fogged, right? So the materials have changed, right? I'm not using the same cinema film that he was using, right? With Gypsies and Invasion of Prague, it was like a cinema roll film. And then, once he got to know a lot of the Magnum guys, he switched over to Tri-X, which that version of Tri-X is gone. So some of this is like, I can only chase, I can't expect to get exactly what he had because the materials have changed. But there is something to it was a 400 speed film pushed to the max and giving it a lot of time. So, all right, a couple of things I wanted to talk about. Here's an example of his photos, or a photo. Well, I might have more than one. Sort of the look I'm after. This is a great book about him. I've learned some about his process. Not everything, right? This was not written by somebody trying to dig up his practices, which there's sort of this maybe some of this is meant to be private because it's like he figured it out, right? I think maybe he shared it with some very close friends, right? Marquita, her style sort of, I think there's some shared materials and camera settings and darkroom practices, right? Her work is sort of similar sometimes. I think they informed each other. And then, you can't separate out, Koudelka's kind of the images that I look at and think of and aspire to without mentioning Del Pier, right, who helped edit and pick out the ones that I know and love. And then here is, let's see, right, here's his go-to darkroom printer, who is considered the best, worked for Picto in Paris. Voya with HCB and Koudelka there. And then here is, let's see, Sydney Rappaport, which is, right, if you look at the first version of Gypsies, right, it was printed by Sydney Rappaport, who was regarded as the best book printer at that time, right? So all these things sort of come together to create, right, these images and sort of what I'm going for. And of course, like his, right, composition matters a ton, but sort of what I can just sort of practice in my house when I have a little bit of time is trying to get that film aesthetic look of a pushed fast film, right? And I can experiment with different films and developers and strategies. So this is my photo. It is Ilford HP5, and here I'm metered around like the 1600, 3200. Now for a developer, right? This was tricky, but HP5 looks the best in like a D76, ID11, something that's just metol, sulfite, and some type of accelerator, or not, right? And initially when I was experimenting with this against like an XTOL or a DDX, I definitely noticed that D76 was not keeping up in terms of speed or density, but I did like the look and the grain better. And so my idea here for the shots I'm going to show are, well, let's just go with D76 and, think a little more like Koudelka. Like, let's just leave it in there for a long time. So this is what I did. HP5, I'm 1600 to 6400. I have some examples across that spectrum. 35 Prius vehicle Summilux 25 millimeters ICM on my Leica M6 TTL. I use undiluted D76H. Now, H confusingly does not have hydroquinone, so it's H for haste, the person who proposed the idea, but it's you leave out the HQ and instead you put a little bit more metol. 75 degrees Fahrenheit for 27 minutes and inversions every 90 seconds. I do use a Highland TAS for Jobo as a film processor, scanning on the Veloy EZ35 with an SL2 and a Sigma 70mm macro at 7.1. My software is Capture One. This was yesterday. Some test shots in my house. Okay. So the first thing I'll say about this is like it's basically exactly what I'm going for. Right. I love sort of the overall image is very dark and gray. There's beautiful contrast. There's a little bit of pop in the highlights. The shadows are deep and rich and sort of luxurious and have a lot of some texture in there, right? It's sort of, it all looks black, but then you go looking into it and there's this kind of a swirl of some dark tones. And then you kind of dig into it a little bit and the grain is very attractive. And very complimentary. So, have I nailed it? No, I haven't, but I'm getting close, right? All right, let's look at some others. This is Goldie. My computer does take a sec to sharpen up the image, so sorry. Right. Again, it's that a lot of dark gray, beautiful contrast. Right, sort of like a lot of ability to sort of play with the highlights and sort of be kind of select which ones you want to pop, right? And I don't know how much it was Koudelka or the printer, but like he often, right, the brightest, highest values in the print is almost always in the subject, and not the sky, right? It's and that's right. That's not about the picture. That's about the print, right? That's about controlling tones through, with the output process. Now this was early in the roll, and I hadn't decided I was going to push this hard. So this is kind of an example of like an overexposed, even though it's still like probably 800 or 1600, right? But it's a very dense negative, and you can see sort of, right, that combination of the little extra exposure and the extra development, right? Sort of turned the grain up quite a bit. But I still really like the shot. This is that pre-spherical at f2. Now, while I'm thinking about it, right, compare that to right. This was the first shot on this roll, and right before it, I took this picture, which is 400 TX at 1600 in Xtol. Right, so there's that one, and then that one. Right, so it can be hard to tell 400 TX and HP5 apart at box speed, but the more you push on them, the more you can tell they're quite different. Yeah, let's see. Did I talk about this one at all? Again, this was sort of back when I was still thinking 1600. It looks really good. I don't have a ton to show, but I'm going to get to some where I rated even faster. But yeah, really happy with this one all around. Now this one was interesting because there's like this darkness over here on this side of the television stand, but then this is outdoor at daytime, and so kind of an example of sort of like low tones, and then some high tones. All right, so this one is 3200. And I'm using my spot meter, and I can tell that sort of the higher tones on this shower curtain compared to the darkest shadows back here by this razor, right? Those are about 4.5 stops apart. And then this is the one that really surprised me, is I did another one. I shot down to 6400, and look at that. You could almost not tell that I switched images. I was on a tripod, but let's come in here. So that's 64, and that's 32. 64 has larger grain, but has surprising amount of shadow detail for 6400. And Metal it's known for being able to work on the low density shadows. It just needs a lot of time, I think. Now this one was like it's my pre-spherical Sumalux. I'm kind of shooting into the sun, getting a little flare. But the outside is, in addition to having the sky, that's probably like a 10 EV, sort of an overcast day. And then here in the bottom left corner, that's probably closer to 5 EV. So it's not like, crazy amount of contrast. All right. come back in here. This is just out of focus areas, right? So it's kind of how that grain looks. Now, before I show a few, I will. Let's show some more triax examples. So this was triax at 1600 in Xtol. Right, that grain is still fine grain. And there's a lot of gray, but the shadows don't have the same type of richness. Now, I could have developed harder, I guess. So I'm not done testing with triax, right? But, go back to one like, one of the, like this at 6400 or this one, right? And I'm just like, oh, that looks so good. So, yeah, where am I now? Yeah, I've been trying to figure out what 400 speed film am I even going to be doing this with, right? I really liked foam of 400 as long as there weren't skin tones, like Caucasian skin tones. But because that's really my primary subject is like my family, and foam of 400 doesn't have the most speed. I can double X probably is my favorite, as long as I'm not really needing that extra speed, right? Compared to HP5, it's at least a stop and a half slower when you're going for this type of maximum, right? I like double X around, 1,000 or so, maybe a little bit faster. But right here's HP5 easily going out to 3,200, maybe beyond. So, right, it's like, am I going to shoot double X? Yeah, I'm going to shoot double X a lot, right? But I also want sort of an even faster option. And so I'm sort of like, is it 400TX, which I can often sort of look a lot like double X, right? So there's that consistency for me. Or do I want to just go to HP5, something that's a little more classic, a little more latitude, a little more speed, a little more grain, right? A little more richness in the shadows. So I think that's where I'm at. I ordered some HP5, like a 100-foot roll, so I can keep experimenting. And I think it's going to be, right, DDX makes the grain a little too big, a little too sharp. Xtol has this, like, it does have more speed, but I don't love what it does with the highlights as much. It does get a little bit of a coarser grain and also a little more of just homogeneous grain. It doesn't have as much texture. Now, I'm not done testing with Xtol on HP5, but right now, just kind of in the spirit of like, what Koudelka didn't have Xtol, right? He traveled a lot. He's jumping from lab to lab. He was probably just using D76, right? But he was pushing it. It was warmer, it was longer, and he's, figured out how to, maybe not always, right? But there's some attempt to be pushing his, his 400 speed film. So I think it's that when I look at how much HP5 like just kills it in D76 and ID11, right? Maybe not the ultimate speed compared to like DDX, right? But if I give it more time, and then it's a question of like how much sulfite, how much metol, right? What's the accelerator? Sort of balancing those, right? If I take out the borax and it's basically just D23, but I give it a lot of time, right? And I know there's sort of like this rumor that D23 is not as fast as D76, but I would say, hey, it depends on the materials. I don't know. With HP5, it might be, right, if I just give it a lot of time, right? Because what I'm using is just metol sulfite and a little bit of borax. So I'm really just talking about reducing the borax, but giving it more time. So then I'd have this like exciting thing where I'm only using, right, metol and sodium sulfite, right, which makes this very easy and accessible and affordable and cheap, and it just like, yeah, it might be the winning recipe. So I called this cracking the Koudelka Code chapter 376, because I've been at this a long time, and it's not over, right? This is something I will always continue to be doing, and it's not just trying to catch Koudelka, right? But it's like it's trying to push fast film for an aesthetic for my photographs, right? That takes it, I'm hoping, right, elevates it, right? So not only is my composition strong, my content, my subject matter, right, all that, but also, right, the medium itself is really beautiful. So, all right, to be continued.